We want to invite Dr. Ahmed back up. We're going to try to turn on, Benjamin will get our house lights back on, hopefully. And we'll take a few minutes for discussion. And thank you. It was a very powerful film. And it's kind of interesting to see as well after... as well after seeing the first, which was paralleled, that Akbar does this not just with himself, but he takes students from the university, and they're going and having this entire cultural experience. And I want to ask you and start off, and then we'll, as the lights come up, we'll just let you raise your hand, and we'll take a microphone to you or have you stand up and speak very loudly. What was, for you, what was the most fascinating part? What do you think you learned the most during this period?
Bruce, many things, and I'm exploring them in the book, but the one thing that stood out was the number of people from different traditions, really impressive people. You heard some of them in the film, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, or the legendary rabbi of Denmark, the leader of the Jewish community in the Balkans, the Grand Mufti of, again, Bosnia, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Dr. Rowan Williams, who consistently reiterated the common humanity between cultures and religions. It was really inspiring because I felt in this rather gloomy landscape that these people were like beacons, playing the role somewhat like you play here in the United States, that there is still hope for humanity in this very difficult time we are living in terms of world history.
And there was also, it was pretty fascinating in terms of, you know, this concept that you mentioned, if you'd repeat again, that was brought up in Cordova, and this concept of, you know, that being the center of knowledge, that knowledge was going to be the key to acceptance and to enlightenment and to understand. And how is that, how do you see that that's fallen off?
Well, that is the key question, absolutely key question for me. Now I'm talking as not only a social scientist and a scholar, but as a Muslim concerned with what's happening in the Muslim world. When I look at the Muslim world and I see the violence and the chaos, I ask this question: how could a civilization that could have produced Andalusia be going through what is happening today, the Middle East, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and so many other places? And the reason is, Bruce, the focus on knowledge, the idea of knowledge, which drove people living in Andalusia, whether they were Jews, whether they were Muslims, whether they were Christians, to excel in art, architecture, poetry, astronomy. Now that was a remarkable period. Perhaps we in the United States also have that urge to excel in knowledge, in learning. And that is something that drives so many campuses, universities, and individuals. But in Andalusia, it had become almost a cultural norm. And that is something, I think, which was characteristic of that time. So when you read a poet of great beauty, and his verses will move you, and you're not sure whether it's Jewish, Muslim, or Christian. He's writing with such, or she, with such passion and such exquisite verses. And that is because that culture was permeated with the idea of knowledge. And for 4 or 5 centuries, it survived.
So we recently had a scholar series here this last Sunday, Alon Gauch, who is a psychologist, and he wrote about the Israeli mind. And what reminded me of this was fascinating. The woman who spoke in Morocco, who actually is visited here, and I think she was brought by the Walter Ruby's group, she made a comparison saying that it is the mother who has abandoned the child. And the psychologist brought up a concept saying that the Jew has always been in many places what he called the new old baby, meaning that the old baby, the new baby, the new or the old baby, this idea that we carry. So when these workers came into Morocco, or they came from Turkey, or wherever they came, they brought thousands of years of tradition. They then integrated, or tried to integrate, and she brought up the fact that they were rejected by their mother, and hence the violence.
Yes,
But
yes.
I mean, and you're trained. I know you're in. You wear two hats, in the sense that we know that you're the Islamic scholar there, but you left also a long and distinguished history as a anthropologist. So you can speak to this, I hope.
Well, Bruce, you're right, because when cultures are flexible enough to absorb minorities, you have the minimum of problems. And even for this project, my team is doing a correlation right now in which you can almost see it like a scientific study. There are about 5,000 European Muslims who've gone to the Middle East to fight alongside ISIS against European countries. And I was very curious again. I said, something is going on. I need some sophisticated answers as to why. And how do we correlate these individuals against the countries they're going from? What explains this almost irrational behavior? And there's a clear-cut correlation. So you'll have large numbers from France, Britain, former colonial countries, and almost zero from Sicily, South Spain, where you have a very different kind of culture. It's incredible. It's almost like a scientific theory being proved by the ethnography. So we're in the middle of tabulating that.
The irony of the problem with France is that France was it was the emancipation. France was the place that you were going to be a Frenchman first. And then we have the famous, Dreyfus trial, in terms of that Herzl sees this and realizes that if Dreyfus in France is going to be, and that is perhaps the realization that many young Muslims look and say, I will never be anything other than a Muslim, because she also talks, and I believe several times, in saying, all of a sudden after 9/11, we weren't the Turks, but we were the Muslim.
Yes.
A switch from the origins of where we came from to being a generic,
yes,
which happened in America. Jews came, and they organized themselves in all sorts of communities based on their mother Loshan, where they came from and what their mother tongue was, whether they were Czechoslovakian, German, whatever. And then all of a sudden, through anti-Semitism, they got pushed into one block. They were just simply Jews. So is this the experience that the Muslim is?
Yes, it is exactly right. And the Jewish comparison, I have a whole chapter in this book I'm working on right now. Again, the Jewish-Muslim experience. Because the Jewish-Muslim experience in Europe is a fascinating one. It's running parallel, both minorities, both originally from outside, both originally Semitic, both integrated and yet not insider-outsider perspective. But the relationship fascinates me because for the first 600-700 years, that's a long time in history, in Andalusia, they have a very symbiotic relationship. And for long periods of time, they're difficult times, but long periods of time, it's very cordial. Cordial to the point where you have a Muslim ruler in Cordoba, a Jewish prime minister. Things like this are happening all the time. Then you have a second period when both Muslims and Jews are expelled from Spain, and the Jews turn up in the Ottoman Empire. So you have a second golden age, and this is based in Thessaloniki in Greece. And we went to the museum, and again we were amazed at the success of the Jewish community. These became rich textile owners, capitalists, and they were thriving. And some of that you saw in Bosnia, some of the after effects. And then you have the contemporary relationship. And again I ask myself, if historically Jews and Muslims were able to live for 1,000 years with great cordiality, why today are young Muslims going about stabbing Jews, attacking museums, attacking school children? What is going on? What is broken down? And what needs to be fixed? See, as Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs said, that we have shown through Andalusia that it is possible, that an ideal society like that is not a utopia. It actually existed. So the leaders of the communities, both Muslims, Jews, and Christians, have to be able to sit down and say, this existed, it can exist again. The problem there is, Bruce, and this really is a problem because, again, as an anthropologist, I could not resist conducting this exercise. As we traveled throughout Europe, I would constantly ask my audiences throughout Europe, and I did. I talked at university campuses, at think tanks, at various places, mosques, synagogues, and so on. Have they heard of Andalusia? And generally in North Europe, very few people even knew about the concept. Very few people. So if you do not know the time when you were able to live together in some kind of peace and some kind of immobility, you are not going to be able to find that solution. So the first step is going back to knowledge, is just simple learning and knowledge, which is what this film and the book will hopefully be able to present.
So, and we're going to open it up for questions now because there's a problem in a sense is that, you know, we live in a world and age where the idea of identity and pluralism are sometimes, you know, juxtaposed. So there's a question in the back there. Yes, just loud, and if not, I'll bring you the microphone. Is that Mr. Berman? Yes.
We've spoken about this before, but it might be helpful to everyone else. You hold Andalusia out as a wonderful time, but ultimately Maimonides had to run away from Andalusia. And so it was the place where people learned, where they imitated each other in their learning, but yet it seems, and a lot of people think that he had to run away because of Islam.
And you're right, he did run away from Cordoba. And Gary, what was the reason? You explain it. You can't get away that easily, Gary. Well, Gary has thrown a softball deliberately because we've discussed this. Now, again, Bruce, this is important because very often people will tell me this because people don't have an idea of Andalusia. They'll say, yes, but Maimonides had to flee. Yes, he had to flee. But simultaneously, the greatest Muslim scholar of the age, Averroes, who's been quoted here several times, had to also flee. Anyone promoting, upholding, or symbolizing knowledge had to flee because the new regime, the new dynasty that came from Africa were not unlike the Taliban. These were tribal people, thank you, Bruce. These were tribal people coming straight from the mountains with a very rigid form of Islam. And they arrived in Andalusia with this very rich culture, with the universities and colleges and debates and poetry and so on. And they said, break it all down. And that is when both Maimonides and Averroes flew from Cordoba. Maimonides, we need hasten to add, went on to become a very successful advisor to the greatest king of the Middle East, the king of Egypt, Salahuddin himself. Averroes had a much more tragic ending. And the last scene is quite heartbreaking. When this great scholar, the greatest of his age, literally was buried with a donkey carrying his books, no one at the funeral, and in some disgrace.
So Gary, I would give you a different answer, Mr. Berman, and that is that we were all expelled from Eden, but we still strive for the ideal. The fact that we're forced out of a place does not change the essence of the place. And so the fact that it existed for that long period of time, it would be a mistake in the failure of that. So there are, you know, they're not absolutes in anything in history or in any ideal. And so there are going to be people that are going to challenge that. And we also know that history forms itself in cycles in many ways. And what we hope that we will learn from history is to emulate the parts that are going to be most beneficial, so that in what was most incredible of that period of time is that Islam and Judaism, and to an extent Christianity, all operated at the height of their existence in compatibility. So that means that it was the ultimate nature of pluralism that meant, now, I for years, for almost 5 or 6 years, Akbar Ahmed, John Chain, Bishop Chain, and I traveled around. We got along famously. We did all sorts of things. And the reality is that could work because we all accepted each other. I wasn't interested in turning him into a Jew. He wasn't interested in turning me into a Muslim, nor were we going to turn Bishop Chain into either of them. The reality is that pluralism is the ability to accept one another in part of this. And so this is one of the things that happens. And the real interesting thing that you have said, which you talked years ago about Huntington's class of civilizations, is when we have when these forces come into conflict, and we stand on the edge of that right now, which we see and hear the rhetoric that we have, and I'd like you to comment on that, and then we'll take one other question, and it's getting late, and it's getting past my bedtime. But I just want you to know, we'll talk about some other places that we can discuss this, but we're in a place where we've had a bizarre mix in our electoral process between religion, patriotism, all the lines are blurred. It's amazing. And so we've created some where we're having Donald Trump attacked the Pope, essentially, in some sense, when the Pope made a comment about something and got away with it. The most popular man in the world, not Trump, the other guy. Yeah, the most popular man in the world. And yet, in terms of, so we have this really strange thing that we're having people play on the complexity of our identities. And we live in a society now where our identities are so multifaceted. You're a university professor. You're a father. You're a Marylander. You know, you work in the district company. You're an AU, whatever. I can't even remember what their mascot is anymore. I should know this. We have so many multiple things. How do you see what's happening in our world today with this, you know, what actually Freud talks about? I think he calls it fragmentation, you know, and talks about that when that fragmentation happens, this is when we have this bad behavior. But how do you see what's
Bruce,
going on?
I'm seeing some of this as a very direct consequence of globalization, where globalization is flattening cultures, to use Tom Friedman's famous expression. It's just flattening cultures, and cultures are reacting then. So in the United States, you're seeing white culture reacting, the old traditional primordial identity, which Trump is appealing to. You're seeing this happening in other minorities, and you're seeing this in the Muslim world. So to Gary's question, when you expel Maimonides, you are asserting a very tribal, crude, primordial identity, which today is reasserting itself in the Muslim world. So if you talk to the Muslim world and remind them of Andalusia with a film like this, they'll probably try to kill me for it, because they'll say, this is not Islam. Islam is the Islam that expelled Averroes, that finished the idea of pluralism and dialogue. So I would see it, Bruce, as part of the process that's taking place globally, number one. So Trump is not unique. As you know, it's happening throughout Europe, this swing very much to the right, and emphasis on primordial identity. It's impacting politics. It's impacting the politics of hatred, ethnic hatred. And I am always amused to see what the relationship between the United States and Canada, where when Trump emerged, you had Canadians saying, we are putting up a wall and keeping out Americans who want to migrate to Canada, especially since they have a very popular prime minister. And he's popular, Bruce, precisely because he promotes a very active form of pluralism. The fact that he has the defense minister who is a Sikh from India, it's an incredible, and he actually was at the airport to receive the first batch of Syrian refugees, and just the sight of these kids landing and then being embraced by the Prime Minister, who said, welcome to Canada, you're now Canadians. It's a huge emotional impact. So when you talk about the Pope, for a lot of people, he is representing the spirit of the Pope.
And I think the idea of that this Pope's popularity is because he does give a message of absolute pluralism with more than any other time in the history of the Catholic Church. one of the things that was profound is there's Washington Hebrew and others had participated in a unity walk, and one of the great successes is in the second year of the unity walk, how did we manage? We had a real problem the first year because crossing things and whatever, and then we couldn't get police protection. So we needed to be protected as we walked from here, from Washington Hebrew, down Massachusetts Avenue and ended up at the mosque. And we would stop at the National Cathedral and we would go down and we pass. It's an incredible short half a mile because you get the Annuncio, you get the Vatican's embassy. Here you get the mosque, you get the National Cathedral, and the largest synagogue in Washington and one of the largest in North America. And all I'm saying you have all, I'm not excluding anyway, but I'm just saying along the way. So what was fascinating, the students, the young people from Adams, the All Dulles Area Muslim Society, were the ones who were manning the traffic and protecting. We didn't have police protection, but young American Muslims were the ones who organized and did this, and it was a fascinating statement. So I want to thank Professor Akbar Ahmed, for the ambassador, for not only sharing with us tonight, but for his tireless efforts. And if it was not, I had asked him a year ago to present something. He's a sole supporter who will actually be writing an article for our journal to go out, because we're going to continue. The end of this is where we all begin. Akbar and I met right after 9/11, and we both had a conversation, and I invited Akbar to come to my home. I had Bishop Chain there, and we had others, and we discussed in the world post 9/11 what was needed to be done. When everybody was there was such xenophobia, and our decision is that we really had to create a situation in which there was an opportunity. And we created the first Abraham Summit, which was duplicated throughout the United States. On May 20th, I invite all of you to join us for the end of our year-long study for an evening called Faith Over Fear, Choosing Unity Over Extremism. We will have Imam Jahari, Bishop Buddy of the National Cathedral, Bruce Feiler, who has written extensively, and in addition, we believe that Archbishop Donald Wuerl, we hope, will join us, and we're going to have a very short interfaith service, and then we will join with members of all of those communities who are coming for an evening of dialogue. The first part of the evening will be putting questions together at tables. You will be sitting in mixed tables according to religious background and faith, and there'll be facilitators to help us come up with better questions, and we'll spend the evening in dinner over dialogue. We live in a world that over a decade ago, Dr. Ahmed was the sole voice around the country that was saying, we have a clash of civilizations. We have a situation, and he began this project, and it has come, unfortunately, all too true what he predicted. And he sat in my dining room and told me exactly what was going to happen in the Pakistani election. And it happened. He sat and we talked about what were the consequences that would come out of this sheer xenophobia that was being developed. And so the counter of this is a united front of pluralism. And so we want to thank Dr. Ahmed and the incredible students from AU who have journeyed and gone and created these two beautiful and brilliant films. A number of books have come out of this, and we want to thank you. And we thank you for your patience of being here this evening. We hope you will join us on May 20th. And thank you, Dr. Ahmed, for sharing this beautiful film and giving us this evening. Patrick, thank you as well.
Thank you so much, Bruce. Thank you.